Welcome to NACD BoardVision, where leading boardroom advisors, governance professionals, and seasoned directors discuss critical issues related to your responsibilities in the boardroom.
Hello and welcome to NACD's BoardVision. I'm Peter Gleason, Managing Director and Chief Financial Officer for the National Association of Corporate Directors. In today's episode, we'll be discussing business ethics and reputational risk with Demetrios Skalkotos, Senior Vice President of NASDAQ OMX Corporate Solutions here at the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. Demo, it's great to have you with us.
Thanks, Peter. It's great to be here.
Demo, since the earliest era of enterprise, ethics in business practice has been a subject of constant scrutiny and debate. In recent years, there's been a litany of companies that have suffered negative consequences as a result of ethics breaches, whether the breach was real or just perceived.
It's true, Peter, but just as some companies have been faulted by the public investors for failing to adhere to ethical guidelines or for not having any such guidelines to begin with, others have been recognized and even honored for their ethical practices. Not surprisingly, however, most companies fall somewhere in between. They've gone through the process of drafting an ethics policy and aren't doing anything that they shouldn't be doing, but they haven't taken the time to consider what ethics really means to their organization and make it a part of their corporate identity.
For many companies, it's a difficult subject to broach. Typically, companies view ethics in one of two lights: as a high-minded topic full of theories and viewpoints that's best left to business school lecture halls, or as clear-cut set of rules that a company is required to abide by under the law. In fact, ethics is a subject that companies can and should approach in the most pragmatic way possible, as a potential way to increase value. At the same time, it's something that must be treated respectfully with an eye towards the long-term impact on the company's brand.
That's a good point, Peter. At first glance, a simple definition of business ethics might seem to be a company's willingness and ability to adhere to common standards for corporate behavior outlined under the law.
Now, just abiding by written regulations, that sounds a lot more like compliance to me.
Exactly. A company that simply adheres to regulations isn't acting ethically, it's acting lawfully. But what's beyond that? I'd agree that corporate ethics is the mindset, values, and policies that compel a company to go beyond mere compliance and behave in a way that provides even greater comfort to customers, investors, employees, and stakeholders. Compliance may be enough to keep your company's name out of the headlines, but it stops short of ethics.
Ultimately, companies have a responsibility to maximize shareholder value. Where morals can be a starting point for a culture of ethics, the culture that is built makes for a stronger company. Like you, Demo, I've been involved in governance for many years, and I'm sure you'll agree with me that after Sarbanes-Oxley, investor attitudes shifted considerably. By laying out clear guidelines for corporate behavior and penalties for noncompliance, Sarbanes-Oxley and other similar regulations have generally raised investors' expectations regarding corporate governance practices. As a result, they've turned compliance into something that's more of a baseline necessity. It's almost as though ethics has become an investor premium.
Yes, Peter. Compliance is now par in the eyes of investors, and if your company looking to differentiate yourself in the eyes of investors, you have to take the next step from compliance to ethics. By creating a strong sense of openness, honesty, and trustworthiness, companies can create goodwill that leads to a sustainable appreciation in stock valuations that famed shareholder value.
An ethical culture can also allow companies to operate more efficiently. By taking the guesswork out of corporate governance, it's a lot easier to ensure that management and staff are on the same page.
Definitely. And ethics can benefit companies in other areas as well, such as employee retention and satisfaction. Research consistently suggests that employees want to work for an organization that is committed to ethics. Deloitte conducted a survey that revealed that 65% of executives believe that trust is a leading factor in voluntary employee turnover. In their view, when employees quit, it's because they don't trust the companies that employ them. In an ideal world, companies would act ethically of their own volition. Now, this world may not exist, but fortunately, current regulations and investor attitudes have created an environment where companies with a strong culture of ethics stand to reap some very real rewards.
Demo, a culture of ethics is somewhat of an abstract concept. I think NASDAQ OMX knows what it is. You've set a great example for the financial and business community when it comes to communication, educating, and upholding the highest level of ethical conduct. But can you describe how other companies can go about building this culture of ethics?
Contrary to popular belief, A culture of ethics does not begin with a conference call with HR and legal to begin sketching out an ethics policy. A culture of ethics must be developed gradually, and it does not begin with a policy. Companies first have to take a long, hard look of who they are, who they want to be, and how they're going to get there.
I think that for many companies, it's just too tempting to take a box-ticking approach to corporate ethics. If you're looking for evidence of this, just search for corporate ethics policy online and watch how many boilerplate policies come up. Companies can simply download them and fill in the blanks with their name.
It's true, but what these companies should consider is that having a code like that almost ensures that no one within the organization will be seriously committed to upholding it. These companies might end up with a policy, but they'll have the same culture they did before. And while simply having an ethics policy in place can be reassuring, it will not be taken seriously as a value added by the institutional investors.
When anyone brings up codes or policies about ethics, I always think back to Enron, which had one of the most thorough policies around ethics I'd ever seen. Unfortunately, they're not worth the paper they're printed on if you opt out of that policy. This is really about establishing a culture of ethics.
It all starts when management assembles the appropriate group to serve as the company's ethics committee. This management group will define and assess the company's corporate character, determine industry best practices, and then draft an ethics positioning statement for the board to review. Typically, a senior officer, such as a chief ethics officer, will serve as the ethics committee chair. There are well over 1,000 designated ethics officers in the United States, and there are even an association for them, the Ethics Officers Association. Alternatively, this role can be played by a trusted ombudsman inside or outside the company. Some companies have full-time ombudsmen.
Demo, it's particularly important for the board and senior management to be involved in building this culture of ethics. Commitment from the board and senior management is necessary to show employees and investors that ethics is part of the company's identity and culture. Getting high-level engagement wherever you can will only help in your efforts. This is the best example of tone at the top that I can think of.
But the backing of the board and senior management isn't enough on its own to make sure that this culture reaches the employees. Company leaders have to clearly communicate their sense of ethics to employees and staff to provide proper training. It is all too common for employees, and in particular new hires, to not be aware or understand their company's ethics policy. We recommend providing small group training to make sure that the board management and employees are all on the same page when it comes to ethics.
It's also important to build an environment where all levels of employees feel comfortable asking questions related to ethics when they're unsure in a situation. This is where the ombudsman role can be helpful. Ombuds are there to listen and make suggestions confidentially, and if appropriate, off the record. They're not required to report an incident every time they have a conversation. There are two important aspects, not only internal communications, which we've been discussing, but also external communications. Let's remember that under Sarbanes-Oxley, companies must have codes of ethics that fulfill certain requirements, and they must disclose those codes to shareholders and the public.
Yes, but note that the Sarbanes-Oxley standards are a minimum. There may be some additional information relating to the ethics policy that companies will want to communicate to employees, but not to external parties. So companies can create two versions of their ethics policy, one for external use and one more detailed for internal use.
Now, once a company has an ethics policy in place and has laid the foundation for this culture of ethics, how can we be sure that its policies are being respected by its employees?
We recommend establishing a whistleblower hotline, like the one we offer within the NASDAQ OMX Corporate Solutions business, that allows employees to report possible ethics violations without fear of punishment or reprisal. This will not only help maintain a strong sense of ethics within the company, but will allow those on the ethics committee and in the communications department to respond to any possible breaches before they become public information.
I think these are all important considerations for boards and management looking to create value through corporate ethics. Demo, thank you for talking with us today.
Thank you, Peter.
That wraps up another edition of BoardVision. On behalf of NASDAQ and the National Association of Corporate Directors, I'm Peter Gleason. Thanks for joining us.